release in the generators repository, the test files will be generated and committed to the test repository, which essentially means that if you just want to use the tests and run them, you can just clone the testing repository or use them as a Git submodule or whatever you like. Repository, and the test files only if you want to write your own test generators and make them available to the other implementations as well, you have to open a pull request to the test generators repository. If you write tests manually, you can also still put them to the Eth2.0 tests repository, so you don't have to go via the generators repository if you don't need that. There's also a README that describes the process, but I think that's it. And we've already started to migrate the existing generators, so the BLS and the shuffling tests, I think. And also I added simple SSE tests that you can try.
Great. And the shuffling tests are not reflecting the new shuffling, correct?
There is a PR from Paul from this morning.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it was very easy to use.
Sweet. And I had an issue that I posted a couple days ago about, I think the next test that we'll add is these fork choice tests. And it was a question regarding whether we can specify these very abstractly and I think very clearly by just specifying the block tree and kind of the latest votes and specifying what the head should be. And the people that did take a look at it, I think were generally positive about it, rather than specifying like the actual formal blocks and attestations and like getting more state specific. So if you haven't taken a look at that, take a look at it. We'll probably be rolling those out shortly. I think beyond that, the next test would be the state tests, but we're still catching up to things in PyAPM, and then we'll do those tests. Okay, any other questions, comments on testing before we move on? Great. Okay, we have kind of a packed agenda, so we're going to run through client updates. Keep it relatively brief today. Just the high points. Okay, who wants to start? How about Lighthouse?
Sure. So we implemented Vitalik's optimized LMD Ghost, and Adrian did, and he's starting to implement Danny's proposed YAML tests for fork choice testing to test it. We got our BLS implementation to pass the test vectors. We benched it. It's 5 milliseconds for BLS verification on an i7. Created some test vectors. We're mostly up to date with the version 2 spec, and we're going to make some more text vectors as we go. We're working with reviewers to get Rust gossip submerged, where we experimented with alternate repo structures and decided that monorepo is the go for us. And next steps are networking and syncing. We're going to implement Prismatic's YAML chain test format, and we're going to start working on cache tree hashing. That's it from us.
Cool. How about Prismatic?
Yeah, update from our side. So we were updating the core processing logic with the spec, and we're fully aligned with the version 002. It's set for shuffling right now. And most of the resource were spent with validator runtime. So what we were able to accomplish is an end-to-end workflow where we can deploy a deposit contract on Dory Testnet and launch a beacon node to listen for deposit events and the Transtar event of that contract. And then the beacon node monitor till there's enough deposits on the beacon node, and then we can kick off the beacon chain. So we're aiming for 8 validators, 1 shard, epoch length of 8, and the target community size of 1. So there's guaranteed 1 validator per epoch. And I just posted an issue to document the workflow. And then on top of that, we're also working on like a workflow UI for a demo purpose.
Great, thank you. How about Harmony?
Working on the emulator, we have a main scenario now that works a bit. It's a bit buggy. The main scenario, I mean, is it's include proposer, a tester, Eth2.0 chain, and state processing and block processing. So now working on doing some functional testing. Also need to add logs here and there in the components to get a feedback on what is going on inside, and also need to add config and command line interface. So yeah, don't want to make any prediction on the time left to release, but we're put all our efforts to release it as soon as possible. Hopefully next week, maybe 2 weeks, I don't know. So that's it.
Great. Thank you very much. How about ChainSafe?
Hey, hopefully I don't sound like an idiot, crazy this time. Yeah, basically we've put a massive focus on, like, now that we're comfortable with the spec, so we got testing, our coverage is up pretty high on just like custom tests, and we're starting looking at like integrating some of the other ones that people have been talking about. And next week we should start actually wiring up everything and have sort of like some sort of like a mock simulation to a certain degree, and then focusing on getting kind of the Eth1 contract stuff going. And we've been making some headway on the Gossip website, or on the libp2p side. Mike here has been doing a great job at getting the JavaScript implementation more up to spec. And that's pretty much it from our end.
Great. Thank you. How about Parity?
So we are upgrading our runtime into the current 0.2 version. Our last one was based on the really old 2.1, so it's mostly a rewrite. Last time we did this just by a one-by-one spec translation, but this time we decided not to do that. Instead, we want to make things more modular and generic, so it's easier to test, and also we can reuse the code in other situations. So right now I have finished most of the Casper FFG parts and most of the reverse and penalty parts and Randall, and we are still working on the rest of the like upgrading the rest of the spec. So that's for us.
Great. Thank you for your comments and things you've been finding with respect to those the FFG and reward stuff. How about Geth? We have Geth today.
Yeah. Oh, Felix, please mute. So
we had feedback, okay, and now you're muted. Okay.
Yeah, because we're in the same room but multiple laptops. Anywho, so from the Geth team's perspective, not much. We kind of we had this marathon meeting sessions, a couple for the last 3 days. One of the focuses was mostly Ethereum 2.0 and how we're trying to approach the whole thing and maybe get a little bit up to speed. Technicality-wise, I don't think we have anything meaningful to report. I think we mostly just want to create a separate repo in which we can experiment with and maybe start hacking on something. So that's mostly it. One thing that we can probably discuss a bit later is that at least my personal approach is that instead of just implementing the spec, I'm also kind of trying to look at it in a more critical way, trying to break it or maybe challenge a few aspects, and one of them was the serialization format, which I'm not fully aware. I don't have enough knowledge about it to understand what its exact design purpose is. So I have a proposal that might be better, might be worse. But either way, I think can probably discuss that a little bit later. But the reason I kind of brought it up is that I think if we should either clarify the design document in the spec documentation exactly what were the design requirements, and then maybe we can challenge it or not. Anyway, so long story short, we're just starting to look into things, and let's see where it goes.
Great, we welcome breakage. Okay, how about, and we can talk about the serialization format later. I actually just noticed that. I woke up and saw there was a bunch of dialogue around that. Okay, moving on, how about Pegasus?
Yeah, so we are in the middle of updating to the version of the spec 0.1. So we're pretty much done with state transition. We still have, I don't know, about 2/3 or half of block processing to do. We have we completed this, I guess we're calling it like a service adapter. Basically allows us to deploy the beacon chain either as like a monolithic executable or broken into microservices. Basically, it just translates like events from an event bus into gRPC calls automatically. And we still have to integrate that though and test it out. But that's sort of just like a fun side project for now. I believe what's next for us is we have Looming is looking into the P2P implementation in Java that the Web3j guys are working on, and starting to integrate that. And I'm also looking into integration tests and kind of wiring those in. I think we've got SSC tested and integrated into our library so that we can verify it. And that's about it.
Great, thank you. We have a ton of teams still. Nimbus.
Hi. So we did a lot of work in the past 2 weeks. We meet for hacking in Brussels from February 2 to February 8, and also presented a talk at FOSDEM on how to build an Ethereum client. And regarding the hacking we do with the whole team, we provided fixes to our simulation. So we have now state and block processing with multiple validators, just like in the fork choice. We identified the critical path to deliver a testnet MVP in March. I will put a link on what we have to do so that everyone can know what we are focusing on. And like Lighthouse, we think that a monorepo is best. So we did some refactoring of all our libraries. And otherwise, we are also in sync with the latest spec. We did some BLS speed improvement. And regarding our testnet, we choose to make some, let's say, sacrifices. So first is Windows will be a secondary target, while Linux and Mac will be a primary target because of issues with dependency management like RocksDB, compiler issues like GCC, Clang, that are a bit hard to explain and automate if we want people to easily test our implementation. And also still things in lip2p that are missing on Windows. The second sacrifice will be to freeze the specs that we are implementing to either 0.2 or 0.3 so that we have the time to fix or implementation with a stable spec, because during our hackathon in Brussels, we had and we still have a lot of breakages when we were updating to 0.2. So a bit of overview of what we are missing for testnets. A state sync when a client is behind, so that we can request missing either state or blocks to others. A system for broadcasting attestation and proposals. We will be switching from RLPX, which is our current communication, to libp2p, and implement, turn on fork choice, and of course a lot of DevOps. We will basically use AWS nodes to bootstrap everything.
Great. That sounds good. And the intention on the releases is likely to do continue to do a weekly release through February as we iron out some critical bugs, and to assess kind of at the end of February what we should maybe slowing that down so people can have more stable targets. Okay, got a couple more. How about Eth?
Yeah, so we got BLS stuff working this week. There's still some minor issues which we're facing with like the Swift to C++ bridging head or C# bridging headers, but we're working on that. Then the code has also been updated to the latest spec release, so we're on V2. And next we're gonna work on implementing more unit tests so we have most of the code coverage, and then make sure that we get a running simulator going.
Cool. And PyEVM.
Hello. Hi. We keep working on syncing the current spec, and also writing the local simulation without network layer. So it's a very simple serialization to simulate what a tester would do. And in the P2P side, the Python daemon libp2p binding module is ready by Kevin, and we are integrating it with the Trinity node. And also researching keeping supporting the common modules like the deposit contract. So Nicholas, Danny, and Nishan from Prismatic Labs will have some updates on the validator register, the deposit contract recently. You can check that on the deposit contract repository now.
And I don't believe the API changed, right? I think it was just some internal reworks.
Yes.
Cool.
Just some optimization and to be more readable. And thanks to Viper team, they support us very quickly.
Yes.
Yay. And I'd like to share a link here. It's the checklist from the research team. So just what our backlog in our mind. Yep. Share in the chat already. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is that everyone? Diederik, are you still working on a Dart client, or have you been working mainly on kind of research and optimizations recently?
I've stopped working on the Dart client, mainly because it's just too inefficient language choice. I've continued to work on several other projects related to Eth2 all in Go. Like you probably know the LMD Ghost simulation by now. I've written like 5 different ways of running LMD Ghost with a little simulator to change parameters with latency and stuff like that. So it could help with like making your choice for your client and how to implement your fork choice rule. And then I've started working just a few days ago on the shuffling algorithm, and found a little inconsistency between the set shuffling and the individual index shuffling. But I documented it, and this is something maybe that some clients may want to look at if they just copy to the original code from the issue. And then again, yeah, that's mostly it. And I'm considering contributing to the upcoming project from Gav. Like it's called Firefly now, from Kahalibe and Peter. Yeah, but it's still like very early.
Cool, thank you. I appreciate the optimizations, and if you haven't, if you all haven't looked at them, they're definitely worthwhile taking a look at for some inspiration on these algorithms. I guess a note on algorithms in general. I think this is noted maybe in the spec somewhere, but these internal functions are for explaining the functionality, not for dictating precisely how you must do things. We're not going to be running test vectors against, get current epoch and things like that. And so I know that at this point, due to the spec changes, it was easier to follow things to the T. But as the spec is stabilizing more and more, please do break out of that. Like, don't try. It is not an efficient path to follow everything written in the spec to the T. Okay, I believe that is all for the client updates. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to skip to number 5, which is just a quick note on light clients. Some team or two should probably drive the path forward on making a light client first. Specifically, for a number of reasons. Light clients are very important to the healthy network. But specifically, the sooner that we get a viable light client to mainnet, the sooner that we can do some of the things that allow us to upgrade 1.0, specifically the finality of the chain on 1.0. And then beyond that, maybe exposing a state route from 2.0 into 1.0 so that the data layer in phase 1 can be used can be pulled in via bringing witnesses into 1.0 contracts. So not something we need to discuss now, but if you are interested in paving that path forward on the light clients, you can talk to me or people on the research team on how we might do that. Okay, that's... Vitalik, you were...
link to the document that I wrote a couple of months ago.
Yeah, you were breaking up till just the end, and I think you said you were going to link to the document that you wrote a couple months ago.
No, I was wondering if you have the link. Otherwise, I can look for it.
Yeah, I'll drop it in the chat. You're talking about just the issue in the spec repo, right? Right, okay, sharing that now, the light client proposal. Very cool. So again, if you're interested in driving that forward, we'd definitely like to see 1 or 2 of the clients take it. Okay. Next up is Discovery v5 update and discussion. Felix, can you give us a rundown on what's going on in Discovery v5?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so it's been going, not super much has happened, but we do actually have, so Frank's completed a document that I think maybe many of you have already seen. It's a Google document that is basically a preliminary specification for the wire protocol for this. I started working on an implementation of it. And yeah, here at the team meeting, we've been discussing the way forward in general and how to, yeah, basically the yeah, forgot what I wanted to say, but basically our rough plan is to just basically make the priority to get it implemented, at least in a sort of prototype way, and then also listen to all of your guys' feedback on the actual wire protocol.
What would you see are any major hurdles to moving this towards prototype and then into production?
I'm not seeing any right now.
Great. And is there any, if one or two of these teams wanted to get their hands dirty and maybe help out, what would be the best way for them to do so?
I mean, so one of the things you could definitely do is look into the ENR format. This is published on eeps.ethereum.org because it is kind of a core component, so it has a similar role to say SSD for the beacon chain, in that it's a standalone format that you can implement and test independently without having to talk to any other node or anything like that. And you're definitely going to need it so if anyone wants to implement that, like, I think they should just go ahead and do it. I can link it in the chat.
Yes, please do. I think it's 778, right?
Yeah, something like that. So what would be the yeah, let me ask different way. So what is the what's the current status, so to say, on the research side of things? I mean, I know I haven't really participated in the in the forums or anything, so I don't really know what kinds of ideas are floating around in terms of networking in general and everything. Is there anything major that has been discussed or anything?
With respect to requirements or framework, the general path forward right now is to use libp2p, a subset of libp2p, and to integrate Discovery v5 into it, which Raul is here if we want to field any questions with how that might look. And then the major requirements are that nodes can, in a relatively short time, join a shard topic or subnet and begin syncing. This is joining on the order of less than a minute and syncing some amount of the chain over the next 5 minutes or so, and you get an epoch look ahead. Beyond that, at the beginning, we expect to map multiple shards to one topic to reduce the complexity and to increase the stability of these topics and the amount of peers on each topic. And then topics are used to broadcast attestations, which are then aggregated and passed to like a main topic, which is the beacon node, which all peers would primarily really be joined against that one. Any other specific questions beyond that?
No, I mean, this is most of the stuff was, I mean, this is, I know, I think pretty much the general knowledge. I was just, one, because sorry, I usually I don't have to participate in research.
Yeah, and since we do have Raul here, Raul, do you see any particular hurdles in integrating Discovery v5 or any sort of external discovery protocol?
Yeah. Hey guys, so it's I've been going through the Discovery version 5 protocol this morning, and particularly the document that puts together a lot of concepts regarding v4 and v5 and how one compares to another. I found that super useful and definitely recommend everybody reading it. I did find a lot of similarities between Discovery 5, particularly the topics functionality and the shard, sort of like the sharding aspect of it and so on, and the advertisement placing with a subsystem that we particularly have been specifying and we already have an initial implementation of, which we call Rendezvous on our side. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here for synergy because there's a number of very exciting ideas, and particularly, Felix has been thinking a lot about some of the adversarial environments and how to scale advertisements appropriately as the network grows and shrinks and so on. So I would definitely like to create a forum between the people in the libp2p team that have been working or conceptualizing Rendezvous and Felix and whoever wants to get involved to see how we can move forward. And definitely the one thing about Discovery version 5 is the first thing that comes to mind is as long as you encode addresses as multi-adders, then if you want to, so once you discover peers in a particular topic, right, that map to a shard, and then you want to establish a gossip sub overlay, and you want to subscribe to that particular topic on gossip sub, given that you've already found peers in that topic and you want to bind to it, then by using, if you advertise those peer addresses as multi-adders, then you should be able, the libp2p stack should be able to take over that multi-adder and establish the mesh, right, and establish the connection and the stream to start talking gossip stuff on top of that.
Yeah, that is basically the plan, right? So the plan is to so the way I see it is that with this whole Discovery version 5 effort is basically one way to find peers. There are certainly other ways to find peers, but this is the one that we know about that that is we feel is like best suited because it is like it's basically I feel the most sort of it's
definitely.
And then so I mean you can store any kind of address, so if you want to store multi-address it's fine, and it's gonna make it possible to then connect to these and start talking gossip stuff. So there's basically, I don't think there's any problem with integrating these two systems.
Yeah, neither do I, as long as, so this would essentially be a protocol that you develop, and then when you instantiate the libp2p node and whatever client it is, whatever language, you just mount this protocol onto the node, and that's it. And then Gossip Sub would be listening to discovery events from this protocol and would be establishing the mesh. So yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Great, thank you. Are there any questions about Discovery 5 or the P2P integration as we're here talking about it?
Yeah, can you just give me a little bit more information about something that you mentioned? You were talking about basically combining kind of gossip sub channels or pub sub rooms. Different shards into one, basically to.
Right. So I have some notes floating around on this, and maybe you get them into the validator doc, I think. That will probably define some N that is less than shard count, at least especially at the beginning of testnets, where shard number mod N is actually the topic that you use rather than just shard.
Okay, good. So it's not something. Okay, gotcha. So you have essentially a formula that everyone can follow to figure that out.
Yeah. And if we have 4 gossip channels at the beginning, we expect a low validator count. So having some subset of gossip channels might reduce the complexity as we're ironing out all these things. And because these shard subnetworks are very small, they greatly increase the chance of eclipse attacks. And so I think this is another effort to mitigate that by having more people gossiping per.
Okay, so it's going to be also so this is going to be a dynamic function of the number of validators. So
it could be. Right now, I think it's something that we might just coordinate over time. But we could definitely consider it being dynamic. Dynamic in the sense that as the network matures, I think we might double it over time. But something that we can also consider to have in the protocol. But that then at least requires your gossip sub networking implementation to be more aware of the protocol that's running on top of it.
Yeah.
So I'm not immediately wanting to push in that direction, but it's an option.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Anything else on discovery before we move on? Okay. Thanks, everyone. I realized we skipped research updates. Let's not go too deep today, but do people want to give a quick research update?
Yes,
Sure.
I can start. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, someone
What
said.
was the question?
A research update.
Right. So on my side, I've been doing the legwork to get the phase 1 spec is up to a point where there's something theoretically viable for phase 1 by the end of the month. And so far, we've already merged into dev, I think, the structure of the shard blocks and what gets committed to in the shard block routes, where the first thing is basically the exact same thing as what we've been doing for almost a year. And the commitments are somewhat more complicated, but it's basically putting a bunch of shard blocks into a Merkle tree. The thing that's still sitting in a PR is basically everything that has to do with proofs of custody, but not including the proof of custody interactive game. So that basically includes things like the mechanism for how subkeys work, penalties for revealing them early, the rules for when you have to reveal subkeys that you used, also challenging for data, penalizing revealing subkeys early, and a bunch of things like that. So that's kind of sitting there in a PR ready for review. And then the thing that I haven't started writing up, but it's honestly not that complicated. I mainly wanted to just wait until everything before it solidifies is the actual kind of interactive proof of custody game itself. So this would be what happens if you some validator committed to some custody bit, then some other validator computed the custody bit themselves, saw that it doesn't match, and basically wanted to start the interactive kind of quote true bit game in order to figure out who's actually at fault. But like in general, I don't really expect any kind of serious difficulties in that. It's kind of largely a spec writing exercise, possibly with one kind of exception. And the one exception is basically that theoretically this is totally not mandatory, but if we want to have phase 1 be fully
You cut out, Vitalik. Can you hear us?
So fully multi-party compute friendly in the same way that phase 0 is, then instead of
Hey, you just muted. You were coming back via, but we can hear you now, I think.
Yeah, no, sorry,
Okay,
signal's not good here. But basically, if we want to make it multi-party compute friendly, then we need to replace XOR with something more complicated. But that's a kind of very discrete and separate component in the same way the shuffling algorithm was.
Right, it's pretty much changing one operation within this algorithm. No matter how complex that black box is.
Yeah, so what I'll probably do is I'll just, when I get to writing up the proof of custody game, write it as just using the hash of the data leaf and your subkey, and then the same way we eventually swapped in a different shuffling algorithm, we'll just swap in a different hash function, which could be some fancy thing that you can MPC in 5 rounds because it mixes different binary fields in weird ways. It could be elliptic curve multiplication. There's still possibilities to go through.
Right, and just to be clear, the idea of keeping these things multi-party computation friendly is so that staking pools have options that can be more decentralized. Cool. Any other research updates before we move on?
Yes. Okay, go ahead, Justin.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So I guess I'm still very much committed to phase 0. I am, there's still work to be done in terms of finding bugs and design issues. One of the things I've been looking at is serialization and tree hashing. So, expect some changes in 0.3 because a bunch of bugs and design issues were found. I guess I'm very pleased that Peter and Geff are trying to break the spec. And I would encourage all implementers to try and keep an eye for trying to break things, because I still think there's a bunch of things that could be broken. One cool thing to expect soon is a unified signature handling mechanism. So that will be a nice simplification and cleanup.
I think I made PR for that a couple of hours ago, so feel free to look and see if it's similar or different to what you had in mind.
Yeah, amazing. Yes, and yeah, this signature handling stuff would potentially be part of the SSZ spec, so it could be used outside as a kind of a standard. Talking about standards, I've been trying to standardize or find strategies to work with standardized cryptographic primitives. So specifically BLS 12381, I contacted a bunch of blockchains and asked them what their plans were. And the great majority of next generation blockchains are looking to use BLS aggregation in some way or another. And the very good news is that there seems to be consensus that BLS 12381 is the way forward. And there's also appetite to standardize on every single fine detail, or at least as much as possible, to make everyone's lives easier and to have more interoperability. The other cryptographic hash primitive is the hash function. So I guess the good news is that SHA-256 is an option on the table because we have an existing precompile in Eth1, and it looks like, again, the great majority of blockchains, both the next generation ones, but also the current ones, use SHA-256. So it's, at least to me, is looking like a very good option to replace KJAX 256 with SHA-256. One thing that we added recently is transfers, so that you can send BEF within the beacon chain. And I guess that was prompted by the AMA, where people had lots of questions around that. And another question I guess people had is around the fungibility of BEF and F. And I guess we've been thinking about that more seriously and seeing what our options are there. And I guess earlier this month, we had VDF Day, so I won't give the details because I'll probably write a post, but we've basically made lots of progress. We have lots of new ideas, and one of the good news is that the RSA MPC that is suggested by the Ligero team does look viable, and it's been reviewed by several MPC experts that were there, and they seem to agree that it is the idea makes sense and that it can plausibly scale to lots of participants. And I guess the good news here is that anyone who's using RSA accumulators will be able to benefit from that, hopefully this year. And that's it for me.
Great, thank you. Leo, we're going to keep it brief today. We have still a bunch on the agenda, but I want to give an update.
Yes, very quickly, just an update from my side is that I integrated part of the Bitcoin chain on the simulator. I did a couple of runs in order to thousands of nodes simulated. And when I did those simulations, I started running into some problems. At some point, the communication, the number of messages in the network just kind of exploded. analyzed a little bit, and I realized that it happened when there are uncle blocks on the Beacon chain, and I think this is because me, perhaps naively, I assumed that there could not be uncle blocks in the Beacon chain, as from the moment that every validator is assigned at a particular slot, then I thought there is no chance to have Beacon blocks. But then, yeah, I realized that when there is some important latency issues between different nodes, it's actually possible that this could happen. And so, yeah, I'm working on that, and I'm looking at the spec to see how this is actually solved in the spec. I perhaps need more time to deep into this.
Great, thanks. Glad to hear the Beacon chain stuff is getting integrated into the simulations. Yes, in times of latency, there certainly can be uncle blocks or orphaned blocks due to the fork choice becoming destabilized. So that's definitely an expectation in certain environments, although the attestation-based fork choice should allow it to be relatively stable. Okay, great.
Then I can give a brief update
Yes,
on my
yes.
side.
Excellent.
So we've got handle, we've got some slides, so I can share that on the chat immediately. And we need to continue the discussions on that. We've been working as well more on the 1.x stuff on the peer-to-peer discovery. So I don't know, it matches between the 2.0 and the 1.x, but we're implementing the simulator, the peer-to-peer discovery as envisaged by the 1.x guys. So I'm going to put the link there as well. If you have comments,
thanks.
Can be interesting in the future. And that's it for me. It was brief.
Great, thank you. And an update on that is this is the slides are handle their efficient aggregation, network aggregation proposal and research. That's very interesting. And my personal on it is that we should get these nodes on a network and tests. But this is an interesting, viable path forward as we need to optimize. Okay, great. Let's see, next thing on the agenda. I posted a minimal kind of phase 0 wire API before we translate that into an actual wire protocol spec. Some of the components are heavily drawn from the 1.0 wire protocol. Mainly, this is specifying the minimal messages, blocks, attestations, exits that are passed around, and the expected topics to be passed around. One of the more interesting things to discuss is the sync API, or the sync protocol, and how that's a little bit different in the context of a proof-of-stake network with a weak subjectivity. A weak subjectivity being the length of time from when you last synced that you can remain synced, or when you bring something to the protocol, like a recent finalized block, how old that can be to safely sync. And so this complicates things in a certain sense that it requires a slightly changed user experience, and that I have to have this extra protocol piece of information about a recent piece of information about the network, but actually simplifies things another way. The weak subjectivity period, the expectation to serve, that's kind of like this natural cutoff, or that time sum multiple is a natural cutoff for how long a node is really expected to serve past blocks. And so there's really the two, if you don't have, if you're syncing, either the expectation is that you have the state associated with the weak subjectivity hash that you're bringing, that you maybe got from a snapshot or some previous sync and you've been offline, or the expectation is I show up with this latest finalized epoch checkpoint, and it is within the weak subjectivity, safe weak subjectivity period, and I from that point would perform something similar to a fast sync of the state relative to 1.0. If you haven't taken a look at this document and you are know a lot about sync in 1.0, please do. I'd like, obviously can field some comments now or take some comments on there. Once we kind of get a general thumbs up, we're going to turn this into just a more formal spec specifying the bytes and actual messages and what they look like so that we can move forward with networking. This and unified test vectors are really some of the biggest blockers on kind of interoperability other than just ironing out the spec. Are there any comments on this currently? Okay, take a look at it, please, offline. Another interesting thing that comes out of this conversation is the user experience around weak subjectivity. And there's a lot of options there, but essentially if I'll share the link, sorry, Greg. There's the link. So essentially we have to begin to think about what the viable user, what's the user experience around a user who has not synced or is resyncing after being offline for a long time around getting this piece of information from the network, a recent finalized checkpoint. You know, there's many options. It's like get 2 of 3 from your favorite 3 block explorers. Have an option where it's shipped, it's baked into clients when they ship weekly. But anyway, it's something that we should begin to discuss and maybe actually survey and discuss with real users of the network, because it's a slightly modified user experience in a proof-of-stake network.
It would be interesting if, if there was, there's no other option, if the client didn't have an automatic checkpoint, or if the user didn't have a checkpoint to provide. It'd be, interesting if the client, could default, to looking up some kind of a, I don't know, like an IPFS multi-address, that's been voted on like a known good checkpoint.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of interesting viable paths here, and I wouldn't even say that every client has to do it the same way. But there's a kind of large design space there. I might just tweet it or put it on my key, like sign it with my Keybase, just to have a piece of data out there that people can use. But again, that's not like the most sane, or you shouldn't necessarily just trust me. But
okay, so you're not going to require it to be so basically it's going to be up to each individual client to provide a sane user experience.
Yeah, and we can come around some standards, but this is part of the protocol is I need to show up with some recent piece of information, being some recent finalized checkpoint, to sync the network if I haven't synced the network before. And that really is not really like an integral protocol definition of how that should be. So yes, I think the user experience might be slightly varied or standardized depending on what we come up with. Zahari, you raised your hand.
What we have recommended in the past is that the clients ship with a set of known public keys held by reputable parties, such as the Ethereum Foundation, a bunch of other client vendors, institutions like Blockchain X-Force, and so on. So the clients just know these public keys, and they obtain a snapshot from some known location, could be IPFS or something. And the snapshot is signed with a bunch of these keys. And that's how the client trusts the whole community, basically, not a particular vendor.
Yeah, and that's a viable path. But we should also probably expose to the user them being able to override that and provide their own piece of data. But
requiring it to have like a fail-safe is probably in everyone's advantage, right? Just to, if the checkpoint, if it's a known good checkpoint, it's within the weak subjectivity period. It's essentially, and those validators the beacon chain can sync on that known that known good checkpoint, then it essentially makes them a better validator sooner, right?
Right, and this isn't just validators. This is also,
or sorry, beacon chains. Yeah, sorry,
just users, nodes in general.
Yeah.
And yeah, the implication of a known good checkpoint. It's like who knows it, who said it. There's kind of the subjective trust issue there, regardless of how you slice it. Okay, cool. Let's move on.
Just to add a tiny nitpick.
Yes.
Yes, there is a certain trust issue with checkpoints, but essentially you're already trusting your client. So if you're trusting the developers of your client not to add anything malicious, then you might as well trust the checkpoint hash or whatever that they provide.
Yeah, and I think I generally agree with that, shipping in the client and maybe that being the default and allowing me to override via some command line. I think that's a probably pretty sane user experience, especially if there's a diversity of clients, in case someone starts shipping some weird stuff. Okay. Cool. I lost my agenda. Okay, cool. Paths to testnets. Makara brought that up. I've been kind of saying a few things throughout this, being the path, there's maybe a threefold path. One is continuing to iron out bugs and solidifying the phase 0 spec, which we have been doing. And as Justin said, please read the spec with active eyes. There are bugs still in there. Jacek found, or the Nimbus team found a off by one bug during certain attestation inclusions at epoch boundaries that we need to put a fix in for. But I imagine there's things in there. So that's one thing. Another thing is getting these cross-client test vectors together. It does not make any sense for people to have interop, like cross-client test nets or cross-client testing on the network level without these test vectors in place. And then the third thing, really, I think, is the networking specification stuff, being this wire protocol and discovery. On small testnets and small network tests, discovery, maybe we don't need topic discovery and everything can operate on one channel. That's definitely a viable option, especially on low number of validators. But still, this wire protocol is a blocker. So those are the three things that need to happen and continue to happen. So I've been focusing a lot on testing and focusing a lot on these on this wire protocol. And so if you don't have someone on your team taking a look at the networking stuff or the testing, you probably should. But Makara, did you have any other questions or comments on this? And I noted Lighthouse wrote a really good article the other day setting expectations for what testnets are and the different kinds of testnets. So anyone wants to comment?
Do we have a particular deadline, like a date set in mind, other than just like March?
March in what sense? I again, like if we don't have state tests, I think that any sort of test nets should probably not be cross-client. And so the expectation, I think, is to see people experimenting with single-client test nets, short-lived single-client test nets, maybe longer-lived single-client test nets, and as these other pieces come together, experimenting with, one or two clients, or doing some isolated experiments with each other. In terms of some sort of like sanctioned, larger scale, long-lived testnet, I'm not putting a date on that because we don't have the pieces in place to do that, and would be a distraction in my opinion, rather than something that would help us out. So, I mean, those are kind of the thoughts. Again, I'm not putting any sort of deadline on when we reach those milestones, but we're getting to the point over this month where people are going to be experimenting more with single client test nets. And as we get the testing in place, people should experiment, go to a client you're friendly with. Maybe you're targeting the same spec release and try to experiment with some interop stuff.
So maybe it'd be fair to say that if in March, if you manage to get a single client testnet running, then you are kind of meeting expectations. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah. And
cool.
Yeah, I've said it once, I'll say it twice. If we do not have state tests targeting a particular release, you should not waste your time trying to have interop. Because if we're not all passing the same tests, you're going to be working through all those bugs that are certainly going to arise on a network test, which we don't want to do.
There'll be a lot of finger pointing. I wanted to ask, kind of related, about who is going to be going. Who's targeting? Let me start again. I'm wondering for the March, who's going to be on? Sorry, let me start again. In March, who isn't going to be using the Go daemon or Go code for libp2p? I know JavaScript that Loadstar are looking at are going to run their own. We're going to run our own, hopefully. Just wondering who else is.
I think for us, we also not using the Go daemon because we have the Rust version of libp2p, so we probably will use that.
We will use daemon on Nimbus side.
Yeah, likely on the PyAVM side, the daemon for now.
Adrian's been the one who's been implementing it in Rust, but it's my understanding that we can probably expect some compatibility issues between the two, like some kind of teething problems. So, I mean, that's going to be something to consider, but I think getting through that is going to be good because we also don't want to have the whole network, relying on this one implementation of libp2p. So it would be necessary pain, I think.
Yeah, and if we can maybe have those experiments before we're even testing the particulars of the protocol, it might be worthwhile having one or two of these libp2ps tested against each other.
Yeah, so
I would like to note that.
Sorry, go, Mikara.
Oh, I was going to note that the libp2p team has started a interoperability test repository. They'll be adding things for PubSub in there soon. I think there's a PR waiting.
Yeah, so I wanted to say on the one hand, we do have interoperability tests for IPFS itself, and we are getting better at large-scale interoperability tests for libp2p. I am happy to support you in setting up some smoke tests for the protocols that you want to use so a smoke test basically in my head is getting together the minimal a minimal chat application, so to speak, across a number of implementations that are already using Gossip Sub and the protocols that and the transports that you intend to use and so on. On the other hand, I did want to ask Felix, the implementation of Discovery version 5. I assume this is happening in Go, right?
Yeah. So the implementation I'm working on is likely going to be in Go. We have some implementations of some of the components in Python, but these are more used to generate test vectors and things like that. So these are the ones that I use to also verify the Go code sometimes. So specifically, we have a Python implementation of the ENR format and things like that. And I'm looking to also create at least the Python implementation of the wire protocol formats, just so that to see that there are no encoding issues and things like that. But I don't have an active interest in making a production-ready Python implementation.
Right.
There is the general plan that I also outlined at DevCon is to provide a WebAssembly module for Discovery version 5. So this would be something that is likely going to happen more toward the end of this year, where and the goal for this component would be that if you don't have much of an interest to implement this stuff, or you, well, you know, it can be quite a lot of work to get this right, and you know, stay up to date when it comes to, you know, attacks being discovered and things like that. It might actually be really helpful if you can just sort of run this particular discovery in a sort of sandbox and not really care much about the details. So my plan for this, my rough plan for this is that this WebAssembly module would basically expect you to provide very basic functions, like, you know, basically it would be up to you to open the UDP socket and provide a function for reading and writing to it as a WebAssembly linkable module, and then, well, it would take care of everything else, and it would likely call some callback as soon as a node is found or something like that.
Yeah. So the reason why I was asking was because I'm assuming that the people who are running on native libp2p implementations, so Rust and Go and JS, would probably invest in implementing Discovery version 5 once Felix is, you know, mostly done with his sort of like reference implementation in Go. And for the rest, if that reference implementation is built in Go, you can, and I can help you with this, we can fork the daemon repository and add support such that we introduce a number of control messages in the daemon that are directly exposing Discovery version 5. So that would be sort of like an interim solution so that everybody else that's not on these large implementations of libp2p still gets access to Discovery version 5 without having to invest in them.
Yeah, I feel like the daemon is another option, although I still kind of, like, my general opinion is still that the daemon is a sort of unnecessary complication that is more like a temporary fix until everyone gets their stuff together and, you know, is able to link it directly into their sort of application. And I feel like with this kind of thing, like, you know, providing a WebAssembly module, you'll actually be able to sort of like link it without like, you know, running into the cross-language barrier so much. I mean, the other thing we can do is we can also provide a sort of C library artifact if anyone's interested in that. So we can just create a dynamically loadable C library, or even a statically linkable C library that implements this stuff is really up to what people want. So I just always felt that basically WebAssembly would be the best option because it gets this sort of baseline security in that everything runs inside of a sandbox, and any
regarding the Nimbus team, we would like either a C library, or I know that Rust can expose a C interface, so maybe if you can just put some external C in the Rust library and expose components, we will be able to use it.
Yeah, so all of these things are possible. So the artifact that we can provide on the software side is a C library, static or dynamic, or like I said, WebAssembly module, or maybe like a daemon. But I feel like the daemon is going to create a lot of complications down the line, because you're going to have to ship the daemon with your application, and it has to be running and everything like that. So it's kind of I mean, it's nice for experimentation, but if you want to ship an application, then having to ship the daemon is a bit.
Yeah, so let's talk about this in detail offline, Felix, because I agree, and we have discussed as well about WebAssembly forms of libp2p going forward, and I think this would be a good thing to explore together. the thing about just making one single piece of the system WebAssembly is that I worry about interoperability, because libp2p, like at the end of the day, you will want to connect with, with the peers that you've discovered via version 5. You will want to connect to them via gossip sub and establish an overlay, and maybe kick off other protocols and so on. So that's the thing that I'm not 100% sure how that integration could happen if only one element isn't sort of like compiled down and served as WebAssembly. But yeah, let's take that offline. And
well, I mean, I can just quickly add to that. So for me, it's like the whole this node discovery stuff is like in any sensible implementation, what you would kind of do is you would treat it as a black box anyway, and just basically make it so that you can switch out discovery mechanisms if you wanted to. And I see this whole discovery version 5 effort as being like one possible way to do node discovery with certain properties. And it's really like a very, very standalone type of thing, where basically as long as you're able to give it a socket to run on, you can just, you can run it or not, but if you're running it, it will put out suggestions for nodes to connect to. But if you're using some other mechanism, that's totally fine as well. You don't actually have to use this stuff. So that's basically how I see it. It might not even be a good fit, say, I don't know, like on mobile phones, where, connecting mobile phones to a DHT has always been a bit of a problem. So
yeah, definitely. So yeah, I'm definitely interested in taking you up on the WebAssembly experiment. So yeah, let's continue talking about that. The rest, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like just two things to say. One, it seems like with the with the daemon implementation, why couldn't it just be a flag, to switch to Felix's, v5 implementation? And then two, Felix also made the point about, deploying the libp2p daemon is a little bit difficult, but, we have there is a branch of the libp2p daemon that deploys it as a shared object. So that's actually not a problem. It just needs to be integrated into the master branch. Raul, do you know the status on that?
Yeah, I wanted to say that the daemon, like Felix says, is not a long-term solution for us. And what we're looking to when trying to implement on our own, a problem we're seeing is interoperability between the existing implementations where there is no real spec. So I believe that if anything would be useful, at least from our point of view, where we want to create another implementation, would be really a canonical source of truth to go back to validate what is the correct implementation of certain protocols.
Yeah, so all native implementations could potentially have that problem, right, Jason? But
yes.
Yeah, so, indeed, right. And that brings us back to the wish list of a sort of a spec first approach where the protocol is discussed instead of referring to the Go implementation.
Yeah, totally. And I agree with that. We've been trying to make sort of like the shift towards a spec first approach. As you know, libp2p was actually factored out from IPFS and so on. So it wasn't initially a spec to begin with. It was actually an implementation, and it grew out of that. We are, for the new modules that we're implementing, so you'll see this, for example, in Rendezvous, you'll see this in Gossip Hub and so on. We're normally taking the practice of creating a spec along with a reference implementation. We're also going to be structuring, and those go in, either the spec goes in first, like it happened with Rendezvous, and then the reference implementation is merged after the spec, but never the other way around, or they both go in together, right? So we are, like, there is a before and an after. Now we are embarked on the effort of like retroactively creating specs for all the stuff that hasn't been explicitly spec'd out, or where the spec has fallen out of sync with reality. And everybody is like, once again, I want to welcome everybody to contribute. And I spoke to Danny as well about this. Like, this is really a joint effort. And I want, like, ideally the community, you are part of the community as well. You are the libp2p community as well. So we should, like, I know that from our side, we want to steer this and we really want to do this, but it's like difficult with day to day to actually find the right priorities and the right time. So we would definitely appreciate your help here. So when you detect stuff that needs to be spec'd out, there are a number in libp2p specs/specs. There are a number of pull requests that have been open for a while that we try to, like, one session we hammered out a number of specs together, but they're still there in the queue waiting to be reviewed. If you want to, have a say in those, please feel free to join the conversation as well, right? So to sum it up, we are working on better specs, but feel free to join this effort and contribute as well whenever you find something that's not well spec'd out or something that can be improved or something that is simply not spec'd out.
Yeah, I want to second that. Be actively engaged with the libp2p stuff as much as you can and get back to it. My expectation is that the standardization on libp2p will pay dividends over time, but that there might be a little bit of extra legwork right now. But as you have time, do put in the legwork. Okay. Anything else related to testnets, networking, interoperability, all that fun stuff?
Just the point about the canonical implementation. If the Pi EVM team is kind of leading the charge and they're using the libp2p daemon, so can we expect to sort of look to that implementation to being the canonical implementation, Danny?
Underneath the daemon is Go, correct?
Yeah.
So yes, the Go implementation currently is the canonical implementation, certainly.
Okay, so it seems like it would be important to kind of come to terms with the V5 stuff that Felix is working on and how that fits in with the libp2p daemon, right?
Yes, and I maybe a little bit discussed offline. I think that if it is not that much trouble, doing some sort of integration there might be useful in the short term, maybe not in the long term. But the Discovery v5 stuff, really, where it sits in relation to the libp2p implementation is not super relevant to the libp2p spec itself, as long as the messages about discovered peers are being passed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically these things are really not so related. So it's basically the libp2p specs are one thing, and then this particular discovery mechanism is a different thing with its own spec and its own sort of it's a bit of an external project. You can integrate it with libp2p if you want to. You can put an interface on top in the software if you want to, but realistically, we're just gonna we have this spec first approach, and we're definitely gonna look toward finishing the spec very, very soon, as soon as we can. Although I don't want to put a date on it, but it's definitely gonna we're really, really working on the spec at the moment. And then how exactly the integration will work on the software side, I think we can figure that out.
Yeah, so Danny, is there a way that we can create kind of a smaller team of people who are interested, or maybe representatives from each team that somewhat are, the peer-to-peer people in those teams to actually discuss, how we're going to move forward with this? Because some kind of fluid forum, right? Not a GitHub issue, not a GitHub repo, but something that's a bit more fluid, because we're not going to flesh it out in this particular call. And I think it's better discussed.
Let's start with maybe a chat on, I hate Telegram, but we use it for everything. Let's get maybe somebody from every team in a Telegram, if that's reasonable. Felix, you unmuted.
I'm sorry, I don't have Telegram.
Could we use something public?
Yeah. That's much better.
It can be Gitter.
Yeah, Gitter.
So we can use Gitter. We have a Discord channel too for Go Ethereum that's fully public. We can create a channel there too. So I think both works. Just let's make something public and accessible for everyone.
Cool. I'm going to err on the side of Gitter, even though the interface is terrible, because everyone here uses it already. Cool.
One opposition, though, would be, Gitter and, chat-based systems are kind of nice for instant collaboration, but if you want actually long-term collaboration from multiple people, might not be the most perfect one. So for example, E3 search may be a bit better, but yeah, whatever. So whatever suits you. Just my 2 cents.
Okay. I'll think about it.
I have another offer. So we do have a mailing list that only I am on. It's p2p at Ethereum.org. So if anyone's in the mailing list, we could just take it there.
Yeah, how do you get on that mailing list?
I can send you the sign up.
Send me the details. Yeah, I'll pick one
I'll
canonical place.
Maybe we can move it to a mailing list or something, because it's really more of a long-term kind of thing. So we set it up a long time ago, but never really used it. So it's like it's a Google group basically, and you can use it through the web interface if you want. We can also make a forum about it. I don't really know, like whoever is, maybe forum would be, I don't know. You can think about this.
Yeah, I'll think about it. We will have some place to meet very soon. All right. Great, thank you. There's a lot of things to discuss there. Appreciate you helping on the call today. Okay. Next up is something that has been very contentious in the Gitter chat recently. Genesis slot number and signed versus unsigned ends. Quick update, a quick briefing on that is that there are some, due to some subtractions very early in the spec, in early epochs, if we start at slot 0, then you get some negative numbers that pop up. And you have to write in some conditional logic just for the first few epochs into the spec. One, as some people might call it, hacky way to fix this is just to not start at 0 and to start it to the 19 or something slot, or to the 63, which was proposed and I think is currently in the spec. This brought up some issues. One, it's not necessarily elegant, and two, this 2 to the 63 thing actually has some like issues with overlapping with signed integers in certain languages and just kind of confusing everything there. Some people are pushed back and say, let's just have signed integers. Some people say we should have unsigned integers because these values should be never be negative, and we should just specify the ranges that are expected and still start at 0 and have some conditional logic in there. I do want to point out that just because we're exposing via these serialization formats unsigned integers, the actual like what you're doing underneath the hood with respect to your integers, the spec doesn't really care, the protocol doesn't really care, as long as you're coming up with the same state transitions and the same formats, and the same serialized and hash formats. So, but that said, if we do start at 0, there is some stuff to work through there. I personally don't think allowing the negative numbers and just going to below 0 is the elegant way to do it. Maybe it is, I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of my opinion, my perspective, at least the background on this issue. Does anybody want to chime in?
I think regardless of what we end up choosing, what could really help a lot and give back, let's say, power to implementers are ranges. Like if we assume that it's alive for 200 years, what are the ranges that we could expect from the numbers? And then everyone is free to implement how it wants. And from, if I had to vote for something, I'm more for signed integers because it avoids dealing with lots of nasty underflows stuff. And yeah, that's it.
Can I interrupt? So a few days ago, we already had this discussion in Gitter. And like the main thing we have to think about is that there's 3 classes of integers we are dealing with. We're dealing with slot numbers, we're dealing with validator indices, and we are dealing with balances. And they may require different solutions. And so I outlined like a list of like 7 items or something like that, with the different options you could take, with Genesis slot an integer size and signed or unsigned. Signed. I think we should move it to an issue and continue there.
Yeah, if you want to open up an issue with the notes that you wrote, happy to take it there. Oh, Yasik said the issues were recently closed. There's been a number of issues around underflow, overflow things. There were two, thank you, Yasik, that were closed recently. I think primarily because they've been dealt with respect to just starting at slot 2 to 63. But there's definitely been some pushback on the implementation teams. I think it seems that the 2 to 63 is probably not the best path forward, even if we're going to start not at the slot 0 because of the intersection with these signed integers, and that just kind of causing issues depending on language. All right, I think we're not going to decide this today, but I'm happy to hear more input before we close it.
I would be interested, Danny, to know if there were anybody who were really set against moving to signed integers, or if it's just because there's a lot of work to do on the spec to make it happen.
The idea, moving to signed integers, especially with respect to balances, seems very wrong to me.
Like I said, there's different classes with different solutions. We should split it up.
Even for balances, I mean, it's easier to catch with an assert if the balance goes negative than if you do a minus and then it rollovers to billions of ETH because you forgot to check that you don't have an underflow.
Right, but when this, you have to check either way, and if your value ends up having a 1 in the most significant bit, and you're transferring that out of what is a signed environment in the beacon chain and into what it would be an unsigned environment in the VM, you essentially still have the overflow or the underflow.
Yes.
And so like syncing the VM with the beacon chain is also a consideration.
I think it restricts like the issues to interfaces between VM and serialization, which is easier to not forget about. Like I know that when I'm out of this domain, I need to check what I'm putting in the container, let's say.
Yasik says implementations can deal with this as long as spec is unambiguous and explicit. I err on that side. I err on the side of keeping what is serialized unsigned and to make the spec hardened up a little bit so that people can do whatever they want under the hood. That said, I don't really... Yeah.
That still leaves the question about the starting slot number. And this thing is screaming at you that signed integers are the right way to go. I mean, effectively, you're just re-implementing signed integers by starting the slot number at a large positive number. So
yeah. I mean, okay. So there's a few things where we have if we start at slot 0, then we have like the negative epoch or negative. I hear you.
Get at least consensus on how to proceed. Say a rough consensus. Say I create an issue with the problem classes and the options known so far. And then we continue the discussion there.
Yes, and it seems like the general consensus on starting at some arbitrary slot in the future is not what people want to be doing. Is that correct? Is that incorrect?
I agree, but I can't say so for others.
Yeah, okay.
We can discuss it later in the issue.
Okay. Great. Dieter, can you open that issue, please?
Just as a self-interested comment, it'd be good to get this resolved fairly swiftly, in that, you know, I mean, for many languages it doesn't make a big difference, but for us core benighted Java programmers, this is a huge difference to the way we implement stuff.
Right. And for the way that it seems that the general consensus is to not start at some arbitrary slot in the future, for what you're doing underneath the hood right now, you can say start at slot 8, or not 8. I don't know, two to the 4th, 2 to the 10th. I don't know. To just get around that issue and use your signed integers in the spec and in your implementation, and then resolve from there. I think regardless that we're going to want to serialize to unsigned integers, at least for these balanced values, is my gut. But again, yeah, the temp fix is to not start at 2 to 63 and to start at 2 to the 10th. And to let's move quickly and maybe resolve this by Thursday of next week. So that'll be by the release next Friday. Great. Okay, we're at an hour and a half. I'm going to say, okay, there's a number of people that are at ETHCC in Paris in early March. I will not be there, but I think any time to get people in the same room, even if it's informal, with respect to agenda, there's probably a lot to chat about and a lot to work through, and maybe some interesting, testing to be done. So if anybody wants to take the lead on getting people in the same room, by all means. And then in April, it looks like there is a critical mass of people from different teams that are going to be in Sydney. And so I will be organizing something either right before or right after EdCon. That's a while from now, so I don't know what the agenda is, but I'm sure there'll be plenty to do.
We can organize something in Paris on Friday if there is enough people interested. So I don't know to get this list of people. I don't know if Prismatic, for example, will be in Paris. Tell me maybe by commenting on the agenda if you're interested or not, and if we have enough teams and enough people, we can organize it in consensus offices in Paris. It's your call, guys.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you stepping up.
So we can just thumbs up on your comment on the ETH call agenda.
Yes.
Okay, and we are going to meet at EdCon. Is that true?
I will be organizing an event for the people at EdCon, either right before or right after.
You said it would be a little bit. It's 2 months out, so it'd be a little bit before you have the agenda. But if we could decide a little, sooner, if it's going to be before or after, that'd be helpful, obviously.
Yes, I'll try to talk with people and figure out that very soon. I think that we have we can use the EdCon venue, I believe, the day before, so I'm kind of erring on that. But I need to kind of see everyone's schedules before I do that. Okay, we have not talked about SOS versus SSZ. I have something I have to do 6 minutes ago, but maybe let's just do a quick brief on that, and then we'll take it offline.
Yeah, so I think this is getting way too long, so I don't want to hold up anybody. If you guys can just send me a link to the discussion forum where we can actually continue discussing, then I'm happy to take it offline. Just as a really quick TLDR thing, yesterday we were reading through the SSZ specification, and although I agree that it's really nice and simple, one thing that kind of occurred to me is that, for example, if I want to access the nth item of a list or of a dynamic type, then that one actually does require linear iteration over the data. And this one is, if we ever want, for example, to process these SSZ packages via the EVM, then this actually might be a problem. So it might become expensive, prohibitively expensive. And basically my solution, I just try to figure out an alternative solution which basically changes the encoding a tiny bit. It uses offsets instead of lengths. And this way it actually permits you to directly access any data in a dynamic list without having to iterate over the previous ones. That said, so I think my serialization format is kind of simpler a bit, and size-wise, it's exactly the same size. But I think one thing that I'm really missing about the SSZ spec is that it doesn't really state what the design goals were. So I do have this alternative proposal, but I have no idea whether it actually satisfies the design decisions or requirements that SSZ set out to do. So maybe as a starting point, one really good solution, but I would be happy for comments on the spec, of course, on my proposal. But I think one of the most important things would be to actually have a small list of things that the serialization format needs to support, and what are the basic invariants that it needs to satisfy. And well, if we have that, we should definitely add it to the SSZ spec. And then based on that, we can either try to challenge it and make something better, or we can acknowledge that it is the best that we can come up with. But either way, it would really help to know what the limitations of the design are.
Right, and I just shared in this rationale doc, there are some design goals at the bottom, and I just shared that in the chat. But why don't we put all of this in an issue and discuss offline, because we're at an hour 40. Thank you for digging in, and we'll talk about it soon. Great.
Cool, thanks.
Cool. Okay, thank you, everyone. I gotta run. Solid progress. Stay in touch on Gitter, the issues. I'm going to be cutting a release of the spec tomorrow. I need to get this critical bug that Nimbus found into it. But great. Okay, cool. Talk soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, all. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
you.